This week, the stock market hit all-time highs, and you would think that greed is running rampant in America. However, Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett have often told us that the world is run by envy, not greed. And in fact, we've all been warned about envy hundreds and hundreds of years ago by William Shakespeare. We'll get into that. And finally, we'll talk about how we can work to cure ourselves of envy. This is The Will Whiten Show. So the big news this week, and all this news is from CNBC, is that the S&P 500 rose to a record high over 7,700, and the Dow Jones also rose to a record high over 54,000. So it would be a time in which we think that everything is going great, but do the fundamentals underneath all of this support these levels? That I can't say for certain, but it is surprising to see the market continue to go upwards. There's a couple things driving this. One is there were talks of perhaps the tensions with Iran cooling this week. That remains to be seen. There's also news of AI companies performing better. We'll take Palantir, for example. Their revenue went up 100% over last year, and their stock saw a bump of at least 20%. I think it went up even more this Friday. Jamie Dimon was interviewed this week, and he said margin debt is the highest it's ever been. So it's not like this is necessarily all cash fueling this. There could be a lot of debt fueling these price increases. He said in an interview with CNBC's Leslie Picker, there's a lot of margin debt that you don't see because it's not called margin debt. It's called other things. It's the kind of leverage, some hidden, some public. He also said that heavy leverage increases the risk that a single investor or fund could trigger broader volatility. So that creates risk in the marketplace when there's higher leverage. It can make things a bit more fragile, is what he's saying. When you have that, you do have a higher chance that somebody will disrupt the market in a quick way. We had last week the news of situational awareness. That was certainly a disruption, but it did not cause a widespread panic. But something like that or bigger could rattle other people. He said he's not going to say it's systemically high, but or that it's going to cause a disaster, but it's high. So we have things that we have the markets at all-time highs, and a lot of it might be fueled by debt. And Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, as I've said, they've talked about greed before. They say be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. But they've also said that greed is not the number one thing that drives the world. It is envy. And what they mean by envy is people often just ignoring the progress that's happened and just always wanting what they see the other guy having, right? So someone could have a quality of life improvement of hundreds of percent, right? 500%. They have a phone in their pocket that can do amazing things. They can live in a comfortable enough house. They could have air conditioning or heating, right? All these comforts. They could have a car that's working. And I get not everyone has these things, but there's a lot of people that can have all these things in America, but then they can still see, well, someone has a bit nicer car, and they start to get envious. Or on the higher income and wealth spectrum, someone has a bit nicer of a yacht, and they start to get a bit envious, even though their life by all accounts is phenomenal. There's a phenomenal comfort to it, phenomenal material comfort to it. But that envy can still creep in, and they cannot especially bear the thought of other people getting rich, especially when the market's going up. There are tons of stories that we hear of, someone that was hard on their luck, and then they just bought the right stock and it went through the roof, and now they have all this money that they don't even know what to do with. And that causes many people to sit there and think, well, wait a minute. Well, I'm not dumb. I'm pretty smart. I work hard. Why isn't that me? That should be me. And that's how it starts. There was a news story in the Wall Street Journal this past week as well And I'm sure this sort of thing, while not intentional, can also fuel the envy. This story was about independent business owners that are just solo, and they're leveraging all these AI tools and generating large amounts of revenue just for themselves, being a sole person running their company. They don't have any employees. The cover story had one example of a guy that is selling AI tools to other entrepreneurs, and his revenue is $10 million a year. One side note here, at least Wall Street Journal calls it revenue. A lot of YouTube videos will say, oh, this person is making X amount in their business. They don't often say whether that's revenue or net income. It's almost always revenue because that's a bigger number. That's a bigger headline. We don't know if this guy has to run a bunch of ads to get his customers. He could be spending $9.5 million on advertisements and server space and everything to run his business. Now, still having a net income of $500,000 for himself, that's great, but that's not what the headline says. The headline says he's making $10 million in revenue, and that's what people think about. So I don't think we got insight into the particular net income there. That's just one thing to note. But it's stories like that where people start to be envious, especially other business owners who look at that and say, well, I employ 10 people and my revenue is only $1 million a year. What am I doing wrong? Even if you might be in a completely different business than what that guy's doing, selling AI tools to entrepreneurs. But it's that sort of thing that can feed the envy. But envy can be a drastic downfall for people. And as I said, I'm going to turn to Shakespeare to help explain this. And he made it very clear in his play, Othello. Some background to this play: there's two characters, Othello and Iago. Iago starts to get envious after he is passed over for a military promotion. So that's where the comparison starts. And then he starts to feel held back and he gets resentful. Well, why can't that be me? And it starts to be destructive. And people can start to do very dumb things when they're feeling very envious, and they can do dumb internal things. So if they see someone else having a nicer car and you're envious of that car, well, then you go take on a bunch of debt to then also have a nice car. So that, I would put that in the not smart category, right? That's something harming, that's harming internally. That's just harming you. And then there's also harm externally, and that's where Shakespeare's play goes, in which Iago starts to harm Othello, and he ultimately pays for it. But there's a quote from him here in the play that I'll read, and this is from Iago, the envious one. "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy," he talks about jealousy. "It is a green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on." So he's using jealousy there and envy, and this is where the idea of a green-eyed monster actually comes from, or being green with envy. And he's saying this to Othello, but it's really him that's beginning to be eaten away with the envy. And spoiler alert, right? It's a very old play, so I hope it's not too much of a spoiler. But Iago ends up being imprisoned. He's being tortured, right? He's publicly shamed for being a fraud. In his quote, when he says the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on, the envy mocks the person that is envious. It provides shame to the person that is experiencing it. It feeds on you. And that is the warning message: to not be envious, to not let it run away with you and get involved and see things like the stock market booming, like an individual company booming, and think you're missing out and start to take harmful actions, whether internally, or making a bad financial decision, or trying to harm other people or something. Either way, that's terrible. And so what do we do to try and cure ourselves of envy? Those are obviously the extreme cases, but what do we do to cure ourselves of envy? What do we do to try and prevent envy from taking our own thoughts over? And one proven method to try and reduce this is to try and look at the whole context or the whole life of someone that you find yourself envious of. So when you see someone driving that new fancy car, ask yourself, how did they come to acquire that new car? Do they have parents giving them money? Do they have a higher paying job that gives them an inordinate amount of stress? Did they take on a bunch of debt to get that car? none of those things may be the truth, but you have to try and understand how they arrived at that, because money is a zero-sum game. Time is a zero-sum game. If you see someone really getting ahead at work and they're getting promoted much more quickly than you are, and you say, well, wait a minute, I think I'm smarter, or I think I work a bit harder, really try and examine what they are doing to get promoted so quickly. And you may find out, well, they actually work 15 hours a day. Well, so that's where the zero sum of time comes in, because say you're only working 9 hours a day. Well, there's another 6 hours that you are doing other things than when they're working every day. And so that adds up, and that's why they're getting promoted. But at what cost? What is the cost that that person is paying to other areas of their life? Is their health awful while you go to the gym every day and your health is much better? Are the relationships with their children or spouse awful because instead of being with them, they're working 6 hours a day and you get to? Or are you wasting those 6 hours? Do you just go home and just sit and watch TV for 6 hours and you say, well, wait a minute, I have just as bad relationships and just as bad health as they do, but they're getting farther. It's because, you're watching TV and that's not benefiting you in any of those areas. So when you start to feel envious, try and think about the other aspects of that person's life, because the time they have, the money they have, it's a zero-sum game. So if they're getting ahead in one area, they are not dedicating time and resources, most likely, to another area. Now, separately, of course, there's some people are just able to perform at a higher level and a more effective level than others. So that's important to remember. But if someone is getting a lot of success in a certain area, they're probably dedicating a lot of time to it and probably sacrificing that time elsewhere in their life. And so it's important for you to understand the trade-offs before you make the decision, before you cast the judgment or feel the envy and then, feel upset with yourself or shame with yourself. It may just be because they are sacrificing other areas. And of course, it may be that you're just not using all of your time effectively, and then you can make an honest assessment as opposed to walking down that dark road of envy. So that's what we can do. That's the recap for today, with the markets at all-time high. The idea that envy drives all, but as Shakespeare taught us, envy can really eat away at you. So what can you do if you find yourself envious? Try and view the full context of the life of the person that you're envious of before taking any irrational action. Have a good night.